Good evening, peoples. I'm Pastor Leia, and this is my co-host, Gingersnap. So welcome back to our living room for our ongoing Tuesday night Bible study series. It is October, which means that it is officially spooky season. Well, I start celebrating spooky season September 1st, but that's neither here nor there. Anyway, I thought it might be fun to look at some stories in the Bible that kind of go with some Halloween themes. So last time we looked at skeletons and the Valley of Dry Bones in the visions of Ezekiel. And tonight I thought we would look at mummies. So we will turn to the Gospel of John, chapter 11. So Jesus has his friend named Lazarus, who has sisters named Martha and Mary, who we've been introduced to earlier in the book of John. So Mary had anointed Jesus's feet with perfume, and her hair, which is feet. Touching feet is I like things that are spooky, but not feet are gross. So spooky, yes. Gross, no. Anyway, sorry, side tangent, because, I go on those. So the sisters send word to Jesus that Lazarus is really sick. But Jesus says he won't die. It's going to be okay. And so he and his friends stay another 2 days where they are before they head back towards Lazarus, who is sick. So then, after 2 days, he says to his friends, "Okay, let's go see Lazarus." And the disciples are like, but weren't the people there just trying to stone you? Maybe if you go in that direction towards the people who kind of want you dead, maybe you could end up dead. So Jesus says, "No, we're going though. We are in the right. God is with us. It's going to be okay." So he explains that Lazarus has fallen asleep, and that's why they need to go see him. And his friends are like, "Okay, but he's fallen asleep. Why would that? You're framing this as a bad thing? We all sleep, Jesus. Every night, generally speaking. Does he need a new alarm clock or something?" And Jesus is like, "Okay, I really should have been a little bit more clear. I didn't mean he was sleeping as in taking a nap, and then he was sleeping as in the final sleep. Lazarus is dead." And his friends are like, "Oh, okay, you maybe could have opened with that. Nice." Anyway, so then they agree, yeah, we should go back and see them in Bethany where they live. And, meanwhile, Thomas says, "Okay, let's go, even if it means that we will die with him," which is such a, I was about to say undying support, but that literally would be dying support. Anyway, so then we read, "When Jesus arrived, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. Now Bethany was near Jerusalem, some 2 miles away, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them about their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him, while Mary stayed at home. Martha said to Jesus, 'Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now, I know that God will give you whatever you ask.' Jesus said to her, 'Your brother will rise again.' Martha said to him, 'I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day.' Jesus said to her, 'I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live, and everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this?' She said to him, 'Yes, Lord. I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one coming into the world.'" So he's been in the tomb for 4 days. I should mention that at this point in history and in the time of the world and before, refrigeration, people would, generally speaking, be buried the day that they died, unless they died super, super, super late at night and it's technically the next day. Because decomposition is a thing that happens and is process that is sped up in hot places. So most people would be buried in the ground in the clothes that they were usually wearing. We have a lot of archaeological evidence of people wearing like some pretty ordinary like clothing pins. Fabric generally disintegrates after a couple thousand years, weirdly enough. But like metal pins, things like that, we are able to tell that they were wearing normal clothes. People who were wealthier might be buried in a cave. If you were real fancy, you might have a stone cave like dug into a stone wall, which would take some doing, especially in the first century. And so if you were going that route with a fancier burial, then there would be perfume and spices involved, and you would be wrapped in bands of cloth rather than in regular clothes. So, kind of the mummy look here is wrapped in strips of cloth, which will come up again. So, so people would be buried as soon as possible, and now it's been 4 days. And there was a reason that people were buried as soon as possible. So 4 days, what's going on now with the body? And an era before refrigeration. Gingersnap, I am holding a Bible. I'm allowed to do that. I can pet you too, but let's not headbutt the Bible. Thank you. So where was I? So when Martha had said this, that Jesus was the Messiah that she believed, she went back and called her sister Mary and told her privately, "The teacher is here, and he is calling for you." And when Mary heard it, she got up quickly and went to him. Now, Jesus had not yet come to the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. Everyone who was with her in the house, consoling her, saw Mary get up quickly and go out. They followed her because they thought that she was going to the tomb to weep there. Well, also, I should mention, funeral practices are just fascinating. Anyway, so the more money you had, the more mourners you would have. Not necessarily because you had more friends if you had more money, or you had more influence if you had money, although maybe that one is true, but because you could pay for more mourners if you had more money. And it's like this sign of social class to have just crowds of people weeping and wailing and gnashing their teeth and ripping their clothes and rubbing ash on their faces. So the more like dramatic your funeral is, that is a sign, that someone has money, and because it would, it maybe should indicate, a lot of people will miss this person now that they're gone. But you can, you can pad that. You can have extra people. So, because those big crowds of mourners are kind of customary, especially for a higher class person like Lazarus, that's why it totally makes sense for a crowd of people to be going with a woman who's going to be weeping outside of her brother's tomb, because that's just kind of like what you did. Basically, it would be like the equivalent of bringing someone a casserole because they've lost someone, I guess. Anyway, so when Mary came where Jesus was and saw him, she knelt at his feet and said to him, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping, and those who came with her also weeping, he was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. He said, "Where have you laid him?" They said to him, "Lord, come and see." Jesus began to weep. So the Jews said, "See how he loved him." But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying?" So now 3 people have said, okay, but couldn't Jesus have kept Lazarus from dying? Both sisters say exactly the same thing. "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died," which is such a loaded statement. On one hand, it is a firm and solid belief that Jesus has the power to heal people, even if they are on the brink of death. But at the same time, it's a very lament, almost angry maybe, like, but why didn't you though? And boy, is that question never answered. Why didn't you? Anyway, both sisters asked this question, and then also the crowd of mourners with them. Why didn't you save him while he was alive? You came too late. He's dead now, but will, come with us. We'll show you where he's buried, and you too can weep and wail outside of the tomb. I've mentioned many times before, I'm sure, that this one verse, Jesus began to weep, or in some translations it's even shorter, Jesus wept, is the single shortest verse of scripture in the Bible. So if you ever want to memorize a line of scripture, Jesus wept is a good one, and it's definitely a good reminder of his humanity and the fact that he really feels alongside us and grieves friends. And anyway, so let's see. Then Jesus, again greatly disturbed, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone was lying against it. Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, "Lord, already there is a stench because he's been dead 4 days." Jesus said to her, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone. So, again, we see that, I know I keep interrupting the story. It's such a good story. There's so much in here. Oh man, now I'm interrupting my own interruption. What was my point? So again, we see that Lazarus comes from money. He's able to afford a stone tomb that's been carved out of rock with another stone cut to roll in front of it. I didn't quite get the exact mechanics of how this works, but I know that it would be rolled in such a way that it would be really difficult to move the stone afterwards. Like it would kind of be lower, and rocks are heavy anyway. So moving the stone aside is not like, hey, can you unlock the door? It's not a simple thing. That'd be quite an endeavor, and why. It's a little bit odd to go through such an endeavor to move a heavy stone when, what's behind the stone is a man who's been dead for 4 days and is already starting to smell. Kind of awkward. Also, it seems a little bit insensitive of Jesus to have to put this woman in the position of saying to him, "My brother's dead body is rotting," but anyway, yeah. There are many unusual things in this story because it's a miracle story, and if it were not a miracle, then maybe it would be usual, but because it is a miracle, it's unusual because that's what a miracle is. Anyway, so they took away the stone, and Jesus looked upward and said, "Father, I thank you for having heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I've said this for the sake of the crowd standing here, so that they may believe that you sent me." When Jesus had said this, he cried with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." And the dead man came out, his hands and feet bound with strips of cloth, and his face wrapped in a cloth. Jesus said to them, "Unbind him and let him go." This is the word of the Lord. So there's just so much in the story. No wonder it comes up multiple times in the lectionary. But it's just such a powerful, unsettling image of this man wrapped in his burial clothes coming out of the tomb, and even his face is still covered, and it's just completely unnatural and not what you would expect. How has this happened? And unbind him and let him go it's a lot, but it's intense and unusual in a good way, not in a Christopher Lee movie and the movie villain mummy who's like evil is rising from the dead to whatever the plot of the given mummy movie is. There've been a number of them at this point. Favorites, but we don't need to get into that. So most people are not super comfortable with dead bodies, which fair, especially again before the era of refrigeration, and in a society where there is a concept of things that are ritually clean and ritually unclean. These stone walls of tombs, they might be painted white so that in the dark you would be at less of a risk of accidentally coming up into contact with the tomb, because then you might become ritually unclean, which is fascinating. Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of a hard story to wrap your head around, that this dead mummy comes out of a tomb, but then like he's alive again. And it always reminds me of a poem, The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock, in which Lazarus has come back to tell you all, I shall tell you all, and then the verse just tapers away. And so what Lazarus was going to tell you about being dead is never said. And I mean, he really doesn't speak again. And like, I would like to interview Lazarus and be like, hey, Lazarus, what was that like? But we don't get that story. And so I guess it's left to our imaginations. Maybe we'll find out eventually. Anyway, so yeah, we've looked at skeletons, we've looked at mummies, and there's a few more spooky Halloween themes that we'll be getting to in the next couple weeks. Also speaking of spooky season and Halloween, this Saturday, October 22nd, is it? I want to say it's the 22nd. We will be doing a trunk or treat at the church. I believe we're expecting somewhere between 20-30 kids. So you can come and park your car in the parking lot, pop open the trunk, maybe decorate it. It doesn't necessarily have to be Halloween themed. My trunk is going to be Under the Sea themed, and I'm not saying that mine is going to be better than anybody else's, but look, I take Halloween very seriously, okay? Yeah, so, decorate the trunk, maybe that's just a little banner or something, or, stick a pumpkin in the trunk, whatever. And then we'll be giving out some treats to the kids coming through, most of whom are from the Kind Club, and maybe they've brought a friend or sibling or two. So it should be fun. They'll be able to visit many trunks in a shorter period of time. So it'll be a great time for us to have conversations and meet some of these kids that have been hanging out in our church on Tuesday afternoons. They only met back again last week for the fall. They have been from last year anyway. Verb tense choice. But it should be a good time. They are good kids, and definitely would love for you to meet some of them. So come and decorate your trunk a little bit, dress up, and bring some goodies or snacks to share. Store-bought or homemade is fine. The kids kind of know the church. So anyway, that is Saturday from 6 to 7. Or, if you just want to come see how awesome my themed trunk is going to be with Under the Sea and my costume that goes with it. And Gingersnap will not be there, even though her Halloween costume this year is Ursula from The Little Mermaid, so actually she kind of would be on theme, but anyway, I go on Halloween tangents. You know this by now. So trunk or treat. There are more Halloween activities. We're doing the Milan downtown trick or treat following week. More about that later, but please do join us this weekend for trunk or treat Saturday 6 to 7 if you are able to. And if we haven't given you too much scary material to have bad dreams, good night, peoples. Until next time.